Hey, everybody. Thank you for starting your week with us. We're your virtual program on books, authors, and the thinkers and the literary life produced by the Southern California News Group. I'm Sam Dunn, an editor here, and I want to say thank you to our Reader Rewards subscribers and really to all of you who come back month after month to support our programs. But if you are a Reader Rewards member attending tonight, you're automatically entered to win a $50 gift certificate to our partner and one of our favorite independent bookstores, Once Upon a Time Bookstore in Montrose. And I gotta say, if you're not a subscriber yet, why not go to scng.com/subscribe to find your local paper here in Southern California and join us. Hey, don't worry about missing anything from today's episode because a recording of the show is going to be sent to you so you can share it or just revisit some of your favorite moments. It's also posted at scng.com/virtual events, and that's where you can find all of our past shows as well as see what's coming up. And speaking of coming up next, join us for and we're very excited about this, our first live Bookish, and that's happening May 7th at 5 p.m. at LitFest in the Dina. Check out the link on the slide there for more information, and I hope that we get to see you in the flesh. Anyway, now let's bring on our beloved host and my dear friend, Sandra Singh-Low. You've heard her as a regular commentator on NPR's Morning Edition and on This American Life and Marketplace. She also hosts the Radio Minute, The Lowdown on Science. She's a contributing editor at The Atlantic. And wait, there's more. She's also the author of 7 books, including The Mad Woman and the Roomba. And check out her new comedy, Mad Women of the West, starring Carolyn Aaron, Marilu Henner, Melanie Mayron, and Jo Beth Williams. It's going to be running at the Odyssey Theater beginning May 26th. Welcome, Sandra.
Hello. From Pasadena, I say hello.
Hello.
Usually we have a lot of very charming banter at the top of the show involving our families, our dogs, our pets. But we have such a mega show today. We're just going to jump right into it. Is that all right?
Get to it, girl. Bye.
Okay. All right. Let's do Ari Shapiro, the 30-second download. In case you don't know this man yet, you should. All right. Ari Shapiro has co-hosted NPR's All Things Considered since 2015. He's reported from above the Arctic Circle and aboard Air Force One, and has some hilarious stories to tell, I should say. He has covered wars in Iraq, Ukraine, and Israel. Shapiro also frequently sings with Pink Martini. Since his debut at the Hollywood Bowl in 2009, he has performed live at many of the world's most storied venues, Carnegie Hall, New York, Royal Albert Hall in London, etc. And we're mentioning this because he talks about it in his book quite a bit. It's delightful. In 2019, he created the show Och and Oi. I say that without splattering my screen, with Tony Award winner Alan Cumming, which they tour nationally still today. Interesting tidbit, he began his journalism career as an intern for NPR's Nina Totenberg, who has also occasionally been known to sing in public. So his amazing new memoir, it's so fantastic, is The Best Strangers in the World, Stories from a Life Spent Listening. And we talked to him just a couple days ago. So let's roll the tape. Oh my God, welcome, Ari Shapiro, or as Obama used to call you, Ari Shapiro.
True, well, he's hardly the only one, but thank you, it's great to be here.
But he did correct himself, I was happy to read. So,
as I said, he had more important things on his mind. You know, I've been called Ari my whole life, it's hardly the worst offense.
Well, like also waiting for you to take your plate of spaghetti off of your lap on Air Force One, just one of many fantastic stories in your fantastic book, which I couldn't put down. So
I'm so glad you enjoyed it. Thank you.
So for people who are new, of course, to your book, they may be more familiar with you on NPR, All Things Considered. I think it's a wonderful journey for them to read. We think of NPR journalists as very straight-laced and very talking in monotone, not monotone, but dulcet tones, let's say. And I think be surprised to learn about your history as a Jewish kid growing up in North Dakota and then coming out gay in Portland. Could you essence a little bit for your viewers the beginning of your journey as you described?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, as I say in the book, I started as a public speaker in the 1st grade because my family lived in Fargo, North Dakota, and my older brother and I were the only Jews at our elementary school. And so every December, we would go from classroom to classroom with a menorah and a dreidel, explaining what Hanukkah is to these kids who'd never heard of it before. And then we moved to Portland when I was 8 years old, and in Oregon at the age of 16, I came out of the closet. And for most of the kids in my high school, I was the only openly gay teenager they had ever met. And so once again, I was kind of performing these acts of interpretation and translation and trying to make something that might have felt foreign seem a bit less strange. And what I realized as a journalist is that I can perform those same acts of being a liaison, making things that might feel far away a little more recognizable and a little more relatable. I can do that with groups that I have no personal connection to beyond my journalistic interest in and curiosity about them. And so it feels like a real privilege to be able to go to either a Bikers for Trump rally or a village in Senegal that is sinking under rising seas and say, how do I help people listening to these stories connect to those who might feel different from them?
And I think that sense of curiosity, and it's just such a treat to read about your family life growing up. In particular, so I have a trans child, so it's kind of like, so we forward as a parent and as a child forwarding these things about you telling your parents coming out that you're gay, and they say, do you want to see a therapist? And you go, no, and then they go to therapy.
Yeah, I mean, well, I think anybody who comes out of the closet has time to think about it before they do. But the people they're coming out to are generally taken by surprise. And so, I did end up going to a queer youth group in Portland in the 90s, which was, in hindsight, sort of like group therapy. But there was this thriving teenage LGBTQ scene when I was in high school, not at my high school. I was the only out gay kid at my high school, but there was an all ages gay club called The City. And so I would go there every weekend with my friends. And then on the weekdays, I'd go back to my packed schedule of honors classes and extracurricular activities. And it almost felt like a superpower being able to walk between worlds like that.
Yeah, and I think before moving to I think the sense of joy, your book is suffused with joy, even wearing like the pink triangle on the backpack that was, started in Nazi times and reclaiming that symbol, and the curiosity of your parents taking you on these nature walks as well, just really suffuses the book.
I love that you say the book feels joyful, because in many ways I wrote the book as an answer to a question that friends often ask me, which is, how do you stay optimistic in the face of everything terrible happening in the world, especially the things you cover as a journalist? I often talk to people on the worst day of their lives, whether that's a mass shooting or a natural disaster or a war, and yet I am optimistic and I do feel positively about humanity. And the reason that I give my friends, the reason that I spell out in the book, has so much to do with the individuals who I've met along the way, the, best strangers in the world of the title. And so those are the people who kind of populate the pages of this book. And I hope leave the reader feeling optimistic and with a little more faith in humanity than perhaps when they started reading.
That makes me feel really weepy, not just because I'm menopausal, but and I think that jumping around, like towards the end of your book, you talk about authors, that it's a really a treat for you on NPR to interview authors, that as opposed to, the headliners of the politicians, et cetera, that they sort of, take us on that path of light. And I think that your book does that as well. So, I mean, I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about that optimism and how you feel the human spirit, like storytelling and the human spirit, relate in terms of what you do on NPR.
Yeah, I mean, wherever I go to tell stories, I look for, I'm thinking about the playwright and writer Taylor Mack, playwright and performer Taylor Mack, who was shortlisted for the Pulitzer Prize for a 24-hour show that told the history of the United States from 1776 to 2016. Each hour was a decade. And as I talked to Taylor about this show, I said, when you tell the entire story of the country, from slavery to the Trail of Tears to Japanese internment camps and on and on and on, what larger lesson do you take away? And what Taylor told me was, these things go in cycles, and I don't know why, but they do. But when you tell the stories of these dark chapters in human history, you also find the stories of people who are trying to make life better for those around them. And all you can hope to do in life is to be one of those people in whatever time and whatever place you're living in. And so those are the people I look for when I go out and do my reporting. It's a man in coastal Turkey during the height of the Syrian refugee crisis who owned a small cafe and put the Wi-Fi login and password in the windows of the restaurant and set out power strips on the cafe tables outside so that the Syrians who were passing through town would be able to recharge their phones and use the Wi-Fi to talk to their family back home. I loved that detail because not only was it a relatable moment that any one of us knows what it's like to have a phone with a low battery, look for a place you can recharge, try to find Wi-Fi to connect with relatives or friends, but also because here's this guy who is not powerful or rich or influential, but has the power to do something for those passing through his community. And in this wonderful act of empathy says, I just thought, what would I want if I were in their position? And that's what I did.
And I love that you brought up Taylor Mack of the Radical Fairy, like that, because, and I saw those shows, amazing, those shows
Incredible.
of a guy who's telling history so specifically in these outrageous costumes by Machine Dazzle. It's like being told. And I think that you're one of the few NPR legends that has a connection to radical fairyhood and queerness, which I adored. And it's like the elderly calligrapher named William Stewart, friend of Harry Hay, the way queer can simultaneously be preposterous and profound, using previously unexplored trickster opportunities to nudge reality into new and illuminating forms. That's NPR. That's the new NPR. That's you.
I love that you identified that quote. That meant so much to me when I got that email from William, who has since passed away. And one of the things that I value so much about the Radical Fairy movement, which started in the 1970s, it was founded by this man named Harry Hay, is that it creates opportunities for LGBTQ people to learn from their elders, which I think is too rare in society. You know, most Jewish people are raised by Jewish parents. Most Black or Latinx people are raised by Black or Latinx parents. Most LGBTQ people are raised by straight parents. Not always, but in order to learn from our elders, we really have to seek them out. We have to proactively go do that. And particularly in this moment, when there are so many states passing laws against trans people specifically and queer people generally, I think it is so helpful for us to talk to people who in earlier generations learned how to not only survive, but thrive in the face of adversity. You know, our elders lived through the AIDS crisis. Our elders lived through anti-employment discriminatory laws. Our elders lived through the pre-Stonewall era, and they have developed techniques that are relevant to us today, but we won't learn them unless we go seek them out.
And another theme of insider versus outsider, us versus them, is this in your travels across the globe, where you have this phrase, war people in war places.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I try to explore in the book is that there's no such thing as an absence of identity. Like, whether we are members of a marginalized group or not, we all carry our identity with us wherever we go. And I realize that my identity as an American is far more relevant in most countries where I'm reporting than any other aspect of my identity. You know, in Zimbabwe, my identity as a white person might be more relevant than any other aspect of my identity. But the point is, having an identity is not just being in a marginalized group. And so I realize that my status as an American who grew up in this country with a huge ocean on either side of it, where there hasn't been a war fought on US soil in more than 100 years, had created blinders for me, where as well-informed and empathetic as I might have imagined myself to be, I was still somehow categorizing people living through war as somehow fundamentally different from me. And the phrase that I used was like, war people in war places. And of course, when I went and started covering wars, it was very apparent to me that there's no difference at all amongst us. And so then my challenge was, okay, if I'm speaking to a predominantly American audience, who presumably many of them have the same blinders that I've had most of my life, how do I tell these stories in a way that doesn't allow them to just put them in a box and brush them aside and think, well, that's tragic, but that's what war is. So what do you expect? And so I give a lot of examples in the book of moments that I tried to go deeper and peel back layer after layer and find ways to tell stories that would connect with people, that would mean something to them, that they would relate to, that wouldn't just be something they could brush aside as war people in war places.
Yeah, and I think it's really a primer, if I'm pronouncing that correctly,
I've never known.
like primer on NPR. And I think that students of journalism should, of course, everyone should read this book. I think from Nina Totenberg telling you to grow a pair, which I thought was hilarious, but also the way that you break down your own stories. And I think there was that Middle Eastern gentleman whose son had died, and you first ended the story with Inshallah, and then your editor, that is such a cliche, and you ended with him scrolling on his phone photos of his son, which is so heartbreaking. And I think that what is great journalism is that you say that instead of our personal history getting in the way of being journalists, of pretending that there's this impersonal other reporting, that it helps us tell the story. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, there's this push-pull between the ideal of objectivity, which I do think is important and valuable and relevant and not something that we should just throw out. And on the other hand, the reality that every one of us carries our history, our experience, our life, our identity with us wherever we go. And so when I tell stories, I want to be a surrogate for the listener. I want anyone listening to my stories to feel that they could be standing in my shoes, having the conversation that I'm having. And in that way, I want to fade into the background. Like, if I'm the focus of the story, I'm doing it wrong. And at the same time, my life experience informs how I tell those stories. And so there's this push-pull between, on the one hand, the desire to be a cipher, a stand-in for the listener, any person telling the story. And on the other hand, my belief that there's no such thing as the view from nowhere, to take an old journalism phrase, and that all of us actually are informed by the lives that we've led. And so there are no simple, straightforward, easy bullet point answers to how to do journalism with those two contradictory ideas in your head. But I think that exploring them leads to some interesting insights. At least I hope it does, that I tried to tease out over the course of this book.
Yeah, and I think, as you point out, also the view from nowhere is kind of like it used to be a straight white male, not Emerson-like eye overview of this that didn't take into account other lives that people were leading. So it's very insightful. Yeah.
Somebody not long ago asked about what we had lost now that we no longer have the sort of three trusted voices of the three nightly network newscast. And certainly there was value in having a shared understanding of truth and a shared set of facts that we could all operate from and disagree about what to do with those facts. That was a loss. But there was also a loss in these gatekeepers only allowing certain voices to be heard. And so we were led to believe that that was, in fact, the view from nowhere, when it was never from nowhere. And now, while there are problems with the media landscape, to be sure, there are also so many opportunities for voices that we otherwise would not have had a chance to hear to rise to the surface and tell stories that would not otherwise be told. And that's something that I really value about the moment that we're living in.
Yeah, no, and in a way, the way that you tell it is, again, so illuminating and so great. I think and I've looked at some of the interviews that you've done, and I think I was so compelled by some of your other lives, aside from going to the Radical Fairies once a year, of singing with Pink Martini, the fantastic, and you sing amazingly in many languages, of a thing that is part of your whole persona and personality, and it is seamless from end to end. And I think that you've talked about how journalism and singing cabaret have certain similarities. I wonder, NPR to Pink Martini. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, and also I just yesterday came home from a 2-week sold-out run with Alan Cumming at the Cafe Carlisle, where he and I were doing our show. I realize we're pre-recording this, but the day before we recorded this, I returned home from this 2-week run with Alan Cumming at the Cafe Carlisle. And so there's the performances with Pink Martini, which is this band of more than a dozen people that tours all over the world and performs in venues of thousands. And then there's also the show I do with Alan, which is very intimate, and it's just the two of us and our pianist, Henry Kapersky. But the thing that I've realized about making music, which for a long time felt to me like something totally unrelated to and distinct from my journalism, is that music is another form of connection. And when everybody in a room is dancing around to the same melody, we are sharing a rhythm that is driving us, that is collective, that is not the heartbeat rhythm that drives us for most of our lives. And so for everyone to have that experience together already is a way of creating connection. And if you add the layer that this is a band that sings in dozens of languages, including languages of countries that citizens of whatever country we're performing in might consider an enemy. You know, like we go to Greece and we perform in Turkish. We go to Israel and we perform in Farsi. And people dance and clap and sing along to the music regardless of what the language is. And that's another way, I think, of breaking down barriers that is different from journalism, but has more in common than you might think on the surface.
And your show with Alan Cumming, I've also seen clips. I know it was playing in LA at some point if you could describe, and again, his Scottish accent is so surprising. Can you just talk about how your partnership with Alan Cumming and the songs you sing, You're the Top and Bosom Buddies, hilarious.
Yeah. Well, we had done a number of events over the years, sort of like live on stage, in conversation things. And at one point we were walking off the stage after one of those and he turned to me and he said, you know, we always have such a good time together doing these things. We should make a show. And I said, don't joke about that because I will absolutely take you up on it. And he said, no, I'm not joking. And so we spent one weekend at his house in New York, one weekend at my house in DC. And then the next time we saw each other was our first time performing it. And what I love about it is that it is both serious and bawdy. It's music and it's deep, thoughtful conversations. It's pretty autobiographical. It's kind of structured around the things that he and I have in common. Like, you know, there's a thing about getting married. There's a thing about Scotland. There's a thing about he got his start as a journalist and I'm also a performer. And but I think it allows each of us to sort of egg each other on and crack jokes and play off of each other in a way that I was recently pulling together all the reviews of it for this packet I was putting together. And I realized the word that appears most often in all of the reviews is chemistry, which is great. Like and I think people expect me to be so kind of buttoned up and stern and serious that when the two of us start cracking bawdy jokes with each other, it's like, you know, like I'm not going to say anything that's inappropriate for, you know, public radio, but when we first did our show, the first two times we did it, the title of the show is Och and Oi. He's the Scotsman, so he's the Och. I'm the Jew, so I'm the Oi. But when we first did it, we called it Alan Cumming and Ari Shapiro, a soft opening. And we made lots of jokes about soft openings. Enough said.
Like a warm hand on my soft opening. Okay, I
exactly. Very good. Well said.
So I wonder if in closing, and the time has just flown and people can spend more time with you in your book, that's fantastic. And this is not something that I think is particularly addressed in your book, but I have two kids, 21 and 22, and they've come up in such a different time. I'm 61, so that's a couple generations like past. I just have this picture of you in high school, going around, coloring your hair, the mohawk, the thrift bin, putting outfits together and translating for people in your metaphorical mask and snorkel, as you call it, like liaising between the Jews and the Scandinavians. It seems like as a young person, you were already not like fully formed, but you kind of knew what you were up to. I wonder if with the young people growing, if you have thoughts for the generation of young people now with their gender identity and, with Twitter and Facebook and the news, if you have any thoughts that you would share with the next generation, and then I'll share it with my kids.
There are two things I would say. One is that in hindsight, it's really easy to look at a successful person and say they always knew the path they were on. And I absolutely did not. I didn't know I wanted to be a journalist. I think it's so important to talk about failure as a step on the path to success, because otherwise we have the misconception that failure is the opposite of success. And every successful person I know, myself included, has failed so many times, and it's part of the learning process. And it was important to me to tell those stories in my book, because I think it's too easy for young people to think if they have failed, they're doing it wrong. And I would say, if you're failing, you're doing it right. And the other thing that I found as somebody who didn't know exactly where he wanted to be and what he wanted to do is that if you set goals that are specific and narrow, it's really easy to not achieve those goals. If you set out to be the CEO of Coca-Cola and you become the CEO of Pepsi, you're going to think, oh, well, I didn't achieve my goal. But if you set goals for yourself that are values-based, if you say, I want something that engages my creativity, that's different every day, that allows me to give back to the world, that lets me, or like whatever your individual set of values is, then there's practically an infinite number of destinations that meet those values that will be an achievement of those goals. And what I do now, from hosting All Things Considered to singing with Pink Martini to doing the show with Alan, like those were never concrete specific goals I had, but they all embody the values that were my goals. And so I would say, as you're on this path, not knowing where it leads, it's okay not to know where it leads. And your destination doesn't have to be a fixed longitude, latitude on the map. It can just be a place that fulfills certain qualities you're seeking out. And it's okay not to know what that place will be.
Oh my God, you're so fantastic.
Thank you so much.
This was fantastic. Your book is fantastic. The Best Strangers in the World. Thank you so much for shedding so much joy and light and optimism.
I've loved talking to you, and I also have to thank my dog who's been sleeping next to us the whole time and kindly did not wake up and shake her ears or bark. So thanks to Simone.
Yay. Oh my gosh, he is so fabulous. I can't stand it. He's so wonderful. That
I just have to say, I just love it. I loved everything about that. Okay, bye.
Okay, fine. Okay, good. Sharon Gless. Now that we've had that humanity, let's rush madly on. Sharon Gless, the 30-second download. Okay, so many of us, myself included, I'm a 1962 age year, got to know Sharon Gless as Christine Cagney on Cagney and Lacey, the hit 1980s female buddy cop drama, a role that won her 2 Emmy Awards and 1 Golden Globe. I don't know if you remember, but she used to trade off with Time Daly. They trade off winning year after year. Fantastic. And they're still friends. But her overall history is fascinating, as you'll read when you read her book. She was the last contract player in the history of Hollywood. At Universal, Gless appeared in The Rockford Files, The Bob Newhart Show, Marcus Welby, MD, amongst others. If you need some James Garner anecdotes, look no further than this book. Really hilarious. She tells it all. In 2000, Gless started playing Debbie Novotny in Queer as Folk, beloved, which ran for 5 seasons. She's also starred in Burn Notice, Nip Tuck, and many others. Gless married Barney Rosenzweig, the executive producer of Cagney and Lacey, very sensationally breaking up a marriage then in 1991, and they have been together for 27 years, and you must read this book to hear the story about that. Her new compulsively readable memoir is Apparently There Were Complaints, although we had none with her fantastic interview. Let's roll the tape. Sharon Gless, it's such a delight and an honor. And your book, Apparently There Were Complaints, it is like eating ice cream. I gobbled it so quickly, couldn't put it down. It is so,
thank you, Sandra.
It's sinfully entertaining. But if we can start just with the genesis of this particular book, how this came to be.
Are you saying how it's happened?
Yeah.
We went into a meeting with CBS. My show of almost 8 years, Burn Notice, was ending. So the CBS called me in to talk to me, and I thought, this is so good. Just go from one series to another, right? So I met with them for an hour, and when I walked in, they said, welcome home, Sharon. Because CBS is where I did Cagney and Lacey. So I was there for an hour trying to, live and charming and funny. And at the end of the meeting, forgive me, the president of CBS, well, her name now escapes me. That's thoughtless of me. There goes that series. No, but she said, Sharon, we own Simon & Schuster. I said, Nina Tassler. I said, Nina, I didn't know that. She said, yes, and I think you have a book in you. And I said, Nina, I'm not a writer. she said, no, but you're a storyteller. And she said, I'm calling the president of Simon & Schuster tomorrow. Well, okay. So she did. And the next day, the president of Simon & Schuster wrote me an email or a text and said he'd like to meet me when the next time I was in New York. Well, I waited a year before I did it, before I went to see him. And that day, I brought a sampling of one chapter I had written. He asked me if I would read it. I said, all right. And he signed me to a book deal that day, and also an audio. His door was open, and his secretary down the hall started laughing when I was reading my chapter. I think it was about my husband and I breaking up. We're still together, but it was about that, and I'm sure I was knocking him. But the secretary started laughing. She said, we also want you to do the audio. And I said, all right. So anyway, I signed the deal with them, and I didn't start it for another year because writing is not my initial skill.
Well, you write, and it is because the book is an amazing read. And as one reads it, one can hear your voice and also see you. It's really extraordinary. And I'm an actress. That's what I do. I know how to be in character, but how to be in Sharon Gless and put it in writing on the page, that was a different story. Can you talk about that process? Because it's so, you are Sharon Gless. It's like, how did you do that? Because it seems seamless.
Well, I came up with the title first. Apparently there were complaints. And if you read the book, you learn where that came from, but I don't tell the story till well into the book.
Yes.
It's about every complaint that I could remember and still stay standing. And one of the complaints later in my life was my drinking. And I got sent to Hazleton, the Harvard of the rehabs. And there was a lot of scandal about it at the time. Chris Cagney, my character, was also alcoholic. And then Sharon Gless, at the end of the Cagney and Lacey, ends up in rehab, where I didn't think I belonged. Hi. At any rate, someone, after I got out of rehab, and again, it was all over the press, and someone stopped me, a friend of mine said, you were in Hazleton? I said, yeah, I was. She said, why were you in Hazleton? And I said, apparently there were complaints. I thought that was a funny thing to say, to sort of cover up the pain of it all. And that stuck. Barney, who became my husband later, was standing there and started howling. And I didn't think he thought I was that funny. So that expression always stayed with me. And when I got the book deal, I started with that. And then I started writing the complaints about myself. But there were complaints from Simon & Schuster too, saying that my chapters were too short. But I don't tell long stories. You wouldn't know it by how I'm babbling right now. But so I had to make adjustments and get help. But every word in that book is my word, my sentences, everything I said. That is me talking when you read the book. And people who know me can hear it. It's my voice. But I did get help because I didn't have the skill to elongate, chapters, but I was good at telling them. So I got somebody to help me, and she put a mic on me, and she typed at the same time. And when I talked, she never took her eyes off of me. Never stopped watching me. She never looked at her keyboard, and she got my voice, and she got my emotions, and she got it all, and she put it for me. It took 7 years for us to do it because it was still under my control. And when somebody died or something, I just said, I can't. Anyway, it took me 7 years, and I did get help, but every word is mine. And I hesitate to say I got help because everybody says, oh, I did it all by myself. And that's bullshit.
Well,
Nobody. does
I
it all by themselves.
the reason that it reads fantastically, and it is your voice. And I think, was it Marsha Wilkie who worked with you,
Mhm.
who is herself a performer and out of theater and et cetera, et
Yes.
cetera. So the way it comes out is dialogue, and it is exactly how you would talk, and you can just feel your personality and your rhythm come through. Also, I think, I mean,
It
what
is
is
how I talk. And she was so thorough that after she'd finish, maybe 2 or 3 chapters, she'd make me now read it.
yes,
Read
that's
it and read it and read it to make sure she got my words, my tone, and that's how it developed.
That is exactly so. But I think what is fascinating is you talk about your alcoholism and the public part of it. I mean, what's extraordinary is kind of in Cagney and Lacey, that big 2-episode story, the turn, the groundbreaking Christine Cagney, father dying of alcoholism, and then ending up, I'm Christine and I'm an alcoholic. I mean, I actually just watched it like in the last 24 hours, and I couldn't stop
Wow.
crying and laughing, and it's an extraordinary
The
piece of
two-parter, you saw both parts.
yes, it's an extraordinary arc. And that while Time Daily doesn't have as many lines as Christine,
Finally.
but really important. And what's extraordinary is that you play every beat of that spiral of the laughing, the crying, the vulnerability, the weird, sexy scene, like of the spilling of the beer, and you did it entirely sober. So, I mean, isn't there a puzzle that, you lived as an alcoholic, so you had to know those beats from having, I don't know that somebody
Oh,
would,
sure.
right? So how did
And
you?
I remember the most. I remember almost each scene. And all I asked Barney for, my producer, because in film, you don't shoot in sequence. It's too expensive. You shoot everything in one location, everything in another location. I said, once I enter my apartment, would you please, I know it's expensive, it'll take a lot longer, but would you shoot me in sequence? He said, that's what we're planning to do. So so sorry, turn that off. So shooting it in sequence really helped me because I knew where I was and I knew how far I had to go. There was one piece of that, since you've seen it in the loft, in Cagney's loft, there was one part where she hears that Mary Beth has gotten promoted.
Yes.
Never showed up at Mary Beth's party. Well,
Yes.
unheard of. She's so drunk that she said, oh my gosh, I've got to get to the party. Anyway, I went over to my closet that was a mirrored thing, and I said, here's what I'm going to do. I tell the director, I said, watch me. And I go over to the closet. It's a sliding door, and I hold on to the glass and I slide till I fall down. And I'm controlling it. I mean, I know what I'm doing. And the director got frightened. She said, no, I'm afraid you're going to get hurt. I said, I'm not going to get hurt. I was, I knew what to do, and it would have been but anyway, I remember every moment of shooting that. The crew was so patient, and so loving with me. Makes me cry.
No, it's still an extraordinary tour de force that's absolutely fresh, and everyone should go back and watch it to be reminded. And I mean, I'm crying just thinking about just the friendship of these two women, and then this monologue of loss and about the father and the mother, and yet the toughness of both of these female characters, the toughness and the vulnerability and the way they look at each other, it's quite extraordinary. So
thank you so much. Time was there every moment with me.
So
really,
it
wasn't about she stepped aside and just made the scene about Christine. It wasn't. It was about her. But when the next morning, Time's character, Mary Beth, is still sitting there. And I love the fact that Christine wonders what she's doing there. She's been in such blackout. She doesn't even remember the people who were in her apartment.
Yeah, yeah.
And Time just went with whatever I did.
And I think that trust is so interesting. I think the whole book is,
I trust her implicitly.
Amazing to read. And I think a couple of touch points to get to, and I sort of also want to end in the present.
Certainly.
So but quickly going through I think some of the amazing stories is, one is you've always been a groundbreaking performer in really norm shattering, like Cagney and Lacey, women of the time. It was never before seen, these two female leads in a drama, and how groundbreaking that was. I think also a pleasure in reading this book is seeing sort of old Hollywood, and Monique James,
Yes.
the first agent, and there's the fantastic.
She was the head of talent at Universal Studios.
Yes, and
Ronnie Meyer was my agent, but Monique James was the reason that I got noticed, and she saw something in me. I'd never been in front of a camera. I was a production secretary when she found me.
but she sort of said, like, nothing matches about you.
That's
Not
right.
The mouth, the voice, you're vulnerable, but you're tough, and you talk like a sailor, and like you're supposed to, but somehow you make it all work. And then there's a great photo of her with her customary cigarette, coffee in the New York Times indoors. And I think she
so
gave you
her.
such great acting advice, right? What was that like? She would
Oh, yes.
daily.
The best advice she gave me was being a contract player in those days, they had these massive screens that all the executives would go and watch dailies in, and contract players were not allowed in screenings. So they couldn't talk about it. So they could talk about it, But one of the things about being a contract player new is I'd build up a little reel of film, little parts that I'd get on the lot. And she'd then put a reel together and make me go watch my work. And she'd teach me, sitting in the seat, just the two of us in these massive screening rooms. And she'd point to the screen. And one of the lessons, she said, I want you to watch this. She said, it looks like you're waiting to say your line. I said, I ain't waiting to say my line. She said, I know. She said, Sharon, you're not listening. If you listen to, she said, first of all, know your words backwards and forwards. You should be able to juggle, move furniture, do whatever you have to do, and know your dialogue perfectly. Then you won't worry about it. It won't show on your face that you're getting nervous, right? It's your time to speak. I said, all right. And she said, because if you really listen, and this is the finest advice I can give you, when you really listen, your face is going to change. Your face is going to come alive, just like yours does, Sandra, when you're interviewing me. I mean, everybody's face comes alive when they're talking. So if you really listen, and you're just hearing, let's say what Robert Wagner is saying, your face will change. And the editor will cut to you rather than the person who's talking, because your face becomes interesting. And you don't have to speak to have that happen. If you're really listening, you will change. And it's the best, and it made acting so much more fun. So much fun. But you can't do that unless you know your dialogue. That's the least important thing.
Yeah, no, and that is such, and when you watch Cagney and Lacey, as I am now watching 24/7, once you go down that rabbit hole, you can't go away. And the way that you and Tyne Daly look at each other, it is totally all in there. I mean, a second theme I want to touch on before the third theme is, I think that it's not only a life in acting and in art, but also in your marriage to Barney Rosenzweig is such a life story. And it's very unexpected, decade by decade. It's a pretty unusual marriage. Can you just give a taste about that to viewers about what that's about?
Yes. Can I say anything I want on your show?
You can. You can.
Okay. You won't get beep, beep, beep.
No.
You won't get bleeped. Okay.
Well, say anything you want. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, when I was reading to the president of Simon & Schuster, their chapter I'd written, I was writing about Barney and me divorcing. And I described him, and I described him as a major asshole. And me as some disturbed, And the secretary down the hall, when I said that, going into my lower chords, she burst out laughing, and that's what got me the audio. For which I was just nominated by the Audio Awards. My audio got nominated. But yes, in it, I do tell about the ups and the downs of being with Barney Rosenzweig. And we did go through all these steps for divorce. Needless to say, I'm still married to him, but it's quite, it's an emotional journey. I had never been married, and I married him when I was almost 50. And I was his third wife. I was so embarrassed about being married because I thought it just wasn't cool to be married. It was really cool to be single. And so when I first got married, I would introduce him as my first husband, just as, you know, trying to take the seriousness off of it. And he would say, and this is my third wife, my last wife, please God.
Oh, and the parties, the story of your two weddings in the same week, and the first two wives having 9 years each, you make it to the, I mean,
This year it'll be 32.
Yeah, that you can't make up. And I think that's part of what reading the book, it's so very honest. And it's like you really reveal yourself over and over. There isn't a stone untouched about what you reveal about yourself. And I think that's a fantastic journey for sort of all women to read. I mean, people of all, and you're such a big icon from Queer as Folk as well. You're such a hero.
Queer as Folk, I know there's still people alive. I keep thinking there's nobody alive anymore who saw Cagney and Lacey, but
yeah. Oh no.
every once in a while.
It's a huge fandom. And I think that sort of, I'd like to sort of am talking about like a project that you have going now. I mean, as you mentioned, your very best friend at this point, aside from your acting career, which I think that you've said is really your true enduring love, but you have your very best friend, Dawn LaFrida. Can you talk about how you met, the nature of that friendship, and actually a project that you have been, a really super exciting movie you all have been working on, and can you tell us about that?
Well, Dawn LaFrida and I met in a casino on Rosie O'Donnell's
cruise,
gay cruises, when Rosie was running it, you know. And when I met her, and she's very girly, she's beautiful, you know, blonde hair, and had on like a lace blouse and everything. I thought, well, we're certainly the only straight women on this cruise. And and she'd never seen Cagney and Lacey. I said, "You're kidding. Shame on you." She said, "Well, I was busy building an empire," which she has. But the next night I met her partner, Lupita, and they're twin boys, 3 years old at the time. She has changed my life. She's just wonderful. I lost all my friends. I think if you read the book, all of my friends died, all of them. And I read a book about it. The last sentence of the book, of the chapter, is "fuck cancer." So I kept complaining that I don't have any friends anymore, you know, and Barney said, "So get younger ones." And I met Dawn LaFrida, and she has just been so wonderful and guides me through everything. She's an enormous executive at well, she owns like 80 Denny's restaurants, and she was a destitutely poor girl, destitutely poor, never owned a doll, and she was a waitress at Denny's and saved her tips and got money off of credit cards and things, and now is the largest single franchisee in the United States.
Which is sort of the sub-theme of the great documentary that you all are involved with, Show Her the Money.
Yes,
about women and money and strength and self-sufficiency. Can you talk about what that is?
It's about Wendy. It's about female founders and their journey to find further funding, and it's extraordinary. And there are 3 of them. I know Dawn's story the best, of course, but it's so timely, this documentary, because these women, none of them had money at the beginning, and now they're funding other women's ventures, only their own. They're continuing to try and fund theirs in this market that's dicey, you know. And it was called Show Her the Money, and I'm in it, but just as a best friend, as someone who as I say on film, in my young years, women, especially women, did not discuss money. Just wasn't done where I came from. So it's a big turnaround. Now we have venture capitalists who are female, but it's hard to get funding for females still. Anyway, this documentary covers it, and it's really wonderful, and I'm very proud to be part of it.
Yeah, so something like less than 2% of all venture capital money goes to women. It's an extraordinary thing, and it's, and I think the lens back to your history of that you and Tyne Daly were the highest after having your series canceled.
Right.
Pours back. Now you're the highest paid women on television. So
well, we sort of had them by the short ones then, because they canceled us, told us to go away, tore up our contracts, and when we were brought back by the public, the American public, which they don't know the power they have, you know, they don't, got to speak up. But anyway, we were brought back by the public, and CBS was sort of, whoops, they put it all, Barney Rosenzweig put it all back together again, but we were sitting in, we had a sweet spot there because they tore up our contract, so we had to negotiate a new one. Golly. I didn't mean to get girly on you for a minute there.
Yeah.
We became the highest paid women in television. We never thought to ask what the men made. And that's the truth. It never occurred to me to ask. I never in my entire life ever felt competitive with men. Ever. Certain, and not with actors unless they wanted to wear a dress. You know, I mean, and that's the truth. So I wasn't that evolved, I guess, to find out, to get competitive with the men, because I thought we were just sitting in that sweet spot, you know. And working with Tyne Daly was amazing, absolutely amazing.
Well, and
7 years.
I know you guys are still friends, and
very close now. We're better friends now.
Oh,
because we didn't have time to be really friends. We were colleagues and supported each other. It was, if it didn't work with us, it was over. But we never got to hang out afterwards. We were putting in 18 hours a day, you know, and forced calls every day, and you get paid for forced calls extra. But finally we said, we don't, it's not the money. We don't need the money. Give us some sleep, you know? So anyway, she and I and Barney, three of us, got through that show. And we are, Tyne and I and Barney, we're all, the three of us are melded together. It was an experience that I don't think any other actor's going through today. Because at the time, it was just another, we had, what? John maybe was able to 25 million viewers a week. That's like the Super Bowl.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. Well, okay, this time has flown too quickly. We really have to have you.
I've been talking too much.
No,
I do that. See, I get wound up.
It's so fantastic. And, you know, you've said that you have one more series in you, although I think you have several more, and perhaps one of those series would be.
Well, I'd like one long running one, so I don't have time to do several more.
Yes, a lady boss with money, like assigning zillions of dollars to women investors and telling people what to do and healing gay men and sort of rolling it all into one role. But your book is extraordinary. You are extraordinary. With luck, we pray to see you again. You are fantastic. You are a natural treasure. You're Sharon Gless. Thank you.
You're a wonderful host. Thank you.
Oh my God. Okay, quickly, the chat has blown up. I'm just making a list so that Diana in Australia, who wants to know where Cagney and Lacey, the title started, Carrie Campbell will tell James Garner stories. We're all going to load popcorn and go to Mikey in Tucson for the DVDs he just ordered, because Gless says she has no friends, so we are her new friends. Thank you, Cher, and 2 Eileens and a couple of Kathleens, and we just love you all. And also Gail Roberts from Novato, California has actually done a class, I think, with Sharon Gless as a creative and expressive woman. So her personal impact is amazing, and it's been a thrill. And thank you for in the chat. We'll plan a field trip soon.
All for it. Anyway, this was so wonderful. Thank you, Sandra, as always. And really, guys, we're grateful to Ari and Sharon for taking the time to come to us, even though they couldn't get here live. And also thanks to our always here but never seen production manager, Julie Corlett. And also I want to give a shout out to our super fan, John Halligan, who hasn't missed a show since we started almost 3 years ago. Thank you, John. And also, folks, before you leave, don't forget copies of Ari and Sharon's books. They're available at Once Upon a Time bookstore, as well as many other outlets, but Once Upon a Time is the place that supports us. If you'd like to share your thoughts for today, have suggestions, or if you just want to have additional questions, please email us at events@scng.com. We're going to end with a word from our books editor, Eric Peterson, on what's coming up with all the great books coverage in our newspapers. Thanks, folks. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Sam. So this weekend, we've got some great stuff. We've got an interview with Don Winslow. I did it, so you can see and send me my grade, how I did. About his new book, City of Dreams. It's the second book in his final trilogy. He's retiring, which is weird because he's putting out books and he's retired. So he's already doing more while he's retired than probably I am on a regular day. We had a really good talk. He's also in, if you guys subscribe to the Book Pages newsletter, he spoke. It's an entirely different Q&A about books and the books that mattered to him. His mother was a librarian. His father was in the Navy and read a lot and let him, just run wild in the library to pick out whatever it was that he wanted to read. So that was a really wonderful conversation. And then also coming in this week's Book Pages, I wrote something about visiting the special collections at the Huntington, as well as about a new book called The Wager. That's by the New Yorker reporter, writer, David Gran, who is a wonderful nonfiction writer. So I sort of mush those up, which I hope I use better words than mush. Anyway, and I've also got a Q&A with Dan Jones. He's a historian. This is his first novel. It's a historical novel, but he generally writes and does TV programs about history. So this is called Essex Dogs. And he's going to be at Vroman's in Pasadena coming up. And he answered a bunch of questions about everything from poses and tattoos to ancient history and more. So we've got plenty in the book section. We've got plenty in the Book Pages, which I hope you'll just go on whatever website you're on, Daily News or Orange County Register, Press Enterprise, whoever, .com/newsletters. You can go down and sign up for it there, or you can just read it online. We made it easy, bit.ly, so bit.ly/thebookpages, and you can find them there. There's Q&As with all kinds of authors. There's stories, interviews, book recommendations, whatever you need. So that's it for me. And I said I was going to be quick and I wasn't. So there you go. Thanks.